The first of those is Russell Vine, who's the Executive Director of Cross River Rail. And we asked Russell what it is that he's really enjoyed about COVID and in lockdown. And Russell hasn't been spending time at home with the kids. He's still working on a major construction project that's kind of situated right in the middle of Brisbane. And for him, though, he said COVID has been an absolute godsend because they're in the middle of a huge demolition and the reduced amount of traffic on the roads has made the whole thing a bunch easier. He then also wanted to rub it in that they're allowed to stand up and drink in pubs in Queensland, but we'll just ignore that. Russell, welcome to the screen.
Hi, thank you very much. Good to be here. Okay, so my name is Russell Vine. I'm the Executive Director for Marketing and Communications here at Cross River Rail. What we're going to cover today is Project DNA, Project Digital Network Approach. We're going to talk about how we've gone about our approach to 3D modelling. It's going to be a little bit of a strange one. We're going to go through some PowerPoint slides, show you some little bits of video, but then on the screen here behind me is the actual model itself, which is on a TV. So I'm talking to a TV with a TV behind me, and we're going to do a live demo. So what could possibly go wrong? Absolutely nothing, right? So I'm going to get straight into it because I've got about 30 PowerPoint slides and I want to get through them in about less than 14 minutes. So we'll see how we go. So I'm also going to be asking a colleague here to move the slides forward for me just because we've got a weird setup. So please don't be perturbed if I appear to be looking off screen. Off you go, Jordan. Next slide, please. So Southeast Queensland transport network. What you can see on the screen there is the existing railway line that services Brisbane, and it's got to be one of the few cities in the world where the railway line for Brisbane doesn't go through Brisbane CBD. It goes slightly to the left through an area called South Bank. And essentially what that means is that all the trains that run across the whole of Southeast Queensland all have to come into the same point in the network. And there's a river crossing called the Merivale Bridge, and it can only handle 24 trains an hour. And population growth is putting huge pressure on that river crossing. So it's a bottleneck and it's a frailty. And it means that if there's a possum on the line at Rome Street Station here in Brisbane, you've got 45 minutes down on the delays down on the Gold Coast, and the train services and the train network basically falls over. Next slide, please, George. So Cross River Rail is basically a bit like a heart bypass. It's a second river crossing, but it goes under the city, not through the city. So it starts at Dutton Park. It goes up through a place called Boggo Road, where the first underground station is. It delivers an underground station at Wollongabba, one at Albert Street, Roma Street, and Exhibition. Second river crossing allows you to run twice as many trains through the middle of Brisbane, which allows you to run twice as many trains across the whole of the network. Next slide, please. So projects are pretty considerable. 10 kilometres of brand new railway lines, 6 of which are twin tunnels directly under a river and under the city. It's going to deliver 4 new underground stations. There's going to be 8 overground stations that are getting upgraded, including a complete rebuild of the station at a place called Exhibition. There's going to be 3 brand new stations built down on the Gold Coast that we're going to deliver as well. There's going to be significant above station development, precinct development at each of the underground stations and Exhibitions. So that's essentially going to transform the city. And just for good measure, we're going to put a new signalling system in that will then get rolled out across the whole of the SEQ rail network, which basically will allow trains to run more closely together in a manner that's safer and more efficient. And that's how you're going to maximize your capacity. $5.4 billion, one of the biggest investments in a piece of infrastructure that the state government here in Queensland has ever made. And without a shadow of a doubt, one of the largest infrastructure projects currently underway here in Australia. Next slide, please. Okay, so Project DNA, the digital network approach. So we made a commitment early in the project to the idea that we would harness digital and in particular 3D modeling as much as possible from as early as possible. And of course, what that led us to was a journey of understanding for what a lot of people on the line today will already know all about, which is the difference between 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D, and even 7D. And the journey we've been on over the last 2.5 years with Project DNA so far has basically shown us how if you get the building of 3D right, the 4, 5, 6, and 7Ds almost follow naturally, and the technology starts to carry you rather than you driving the technology. But I'll explain a bit more about that as we step through how our approach works. Next slide, please. Okay, so the other thing that we didn't do this just because we wanted to do this. We did this because we're lucky in that the government up here in Queensland is particularly forward thinking in a sort of a BIM and a GIS space. And they were determined to have its number one infrastructure project really lean into BIM and really sort of set a bit of a benchmark about how we use BIM and how it could work. And so the conversations we have with our own government became quite conducive to the idea of doing something that might be considered innovative. Also, we're aware of industry best practice. So those of you who work in a BIM space will know where BIM is going. People who specialize in a GIS space will understand where that's going. My background as a marketing and communications expert is very much in things like virtual reality, VR, AR, and MR. And so I had my own views about where we were headed in that space. So between a few of us at the authority, we were able to take it somewhere interesting. But really, the other thing that drove us forward was lessons learned from other projects. And essentially, it boiled down to a fascinating conversation with Crossrail, the project in London, where they were building a new underground line through London, 10 new inner city underground stations being built as part of the project. And we said to them, would you have done anything different? They said, yeah, we would have built a bigger, better model sooner. And we asked them to define that. And they said, well, we'd have basically just combined more of the technologies in a more forward-thinking manner from earlier on. What we ended up having to do was try to basically reconcile our BIM modeling to our GIS land mapping to our VR down the track, and that caused us all sorts of problems. So we were gifted an insight about how to do it. Next slide, please. So we have basically gone for what would be described as a federated model. It's a quasi-federated model, but it certainly has a common data environment and center. So our view is that all the ones and zeros that make up all of the modeling and all of the mapping tools and experiences we create should all sit in a centrally located resource and hub and can be repurposed out through software platforms. Next bill, please. So at a BIM level, that obviously helps us deliver the project. You've got to have a fantastic 3D building information model or building and engineering model of your project. We set the spec for our BIM model early doors. Our major contractors were hired on the obligation that they would support how we wanted to do BIM, not the offer of how they would do BIM for us. So we told them up front, and our BIM model is updated now on a weekly basis and basically is up to date with every aspect of project design and what we're constructing as that design is resolved and locked down and as we head into construction. We're 3 years into delivery and we're 1 year into construction, and we're going to spend the next 3 years building this project. Next slide, please. But what was really interesting, and we'll look at some examples in a second, is how it corresponds to GIS. We also have to think about and plan what's going to get built above each of our stations. So therefore, we have a large planning and economic development unit. We have a large precinct delivery unit in our authority, and they spend a lot of time looking at 2D web maps. And so we talk about that. I'll talk about that a bit more in a second, show you some examples. Next one, please. Then you kind of realize that if basically you're starting to centralize all this information, does it change the way you model your information? Does it change your systems and information modeling? Do you start to think about saving information to the BIM model or to the web map rather than having information stored separately on servers that corresponds? So I describe that as basically building the world's largest filing cabinet. And in my vision for the future of our authority, before we finish this project, if you want to find information about the Albert Street station we're building, you'll go to Albert Street in the model, and that's where the information will live. So it's about saving information geospatially, which I get very excited about. Next slide, please. And then there's my world, communications and community engagement and helping people understand. And it turns out it's quite hard to sell people the idea of an underground railway line because it's underground and it's hard to see. So we need ways and means of making people understand and appreciate the scale of what we're building. And so obviously 3D visualization becomes quite critical. So what we did was we take an approach that says we're gonna deal with all of these uses in a single federated model with a common data environment in the center. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with BIM. So let's go on to the next slide, please. Now, hopefully what you guys are seeing there is a sort of an aerial view of our BIM model. Okay, so I describe our BIM model as being sort of 17 kilometers of building engineering model. It extends out the full length of the project. I'm sorry, it's a slight glitch in the video there. And basically, we map the landscape around it only as much as we need to deliver the construction of the project, okay? So we've got a kick-ass, huge, big, long BIM model with 4 station caverns hanging off the underneath of it and some overground stations modeled on top of it. Next slide, please. Okay, so in our BIM model, of course, though, you can do the overview, but you can also get right down to the granular and the specifics. So all of the engineering details in there. And of course, it allows you to be subsurface. So you can be above ground and you can be below line. You can do all of your utilities and your detection clashes, clash detections and that sort of stuff. But the environment is, you kind of need to be an engineer to know what you're looking at. So I can't show this to the public here in Brisbane in our experience centre where I'm talking to from today because they can't instinctively understand what they're saying. But you do get a few oohs and ahs when you do things like this, where you can strip the station building away. But I'm not going to claim that one too much because you guys have all spent a lot of time looking at this kind of content. Next slide, please. What it also allows us to do is to get into 4 and 5D. So we can model time and we can model money. So we have, for each of our major stations that we're building, the underground stations, we have a BIM model, and then we can color code the BIM components to show levels of demolition, civils complete, upcoming construction, upcoming excavation. So I'll just cycle through those. There's our Wollongabba station. Next one, please. There's our Albert Street station, which is right in the middle of the CBD. And there's our Roma Street station, which is basically a huge demolition job. So the little green bit down in the corner there is the first bit we've started to dig. The grey area unshaded in the middle is the underground station. All the red stuff's what we've knocked down, and we've just nearly completed that demolition. So we've just punched a massive hole in the skyline here in Brisbane of about 3.5 hectares, which has been pretty fun. So just go next slide, please. So that 4D and 5D aspect, we can then basically bring that to life, and we can use this to brief stakeholders, to brief government, to help third parties and community engagement sessions and those sorts of things, help people understand what's happening. And you can see what's happening above ground, and you can see what's happening below ground. And I think our BIM models become pretty consumable. I think the production values are quite high. I think you get to a point now where actually I can show this to the public, and they can appreciate what's going on, but we are nonetheless still in a technical 3D digital environment. Next slide, please. Okay, so where does that correspond with GIS and what we're doing in the GIS space? So what we have here at the project is we have a web map, okay? We have a dedicated web map. It's the project aligned through a traditional 2D map. We can turn layers on and off. We can look at different aspects of the project, and we can use it. And this is where an awful lot of information is stored. Next slide, please. So that means we can zoom all the way down into individual land lots, and we can think about volumetric acquisitions and that sort of thing, and which properties are we going under, and who do we need to talk about. I can help the stakeholder guys. Next slide, please. But also, we can, of course, drag in an element of LiDAR, and we can flip that 2D graphic map to a 2D photographic map, and we can start to understand the built environment. And so that's the Wollongabba worksite. You can see the stadium to the right, where they're going to be hosting the AFL Grand Final. Sorry, Melbourne, thank you. And you can see where I'll show you in a second what that looks like when it gets modeled. Next slide, please. But also, of course, because we've got 3D and we've gone to photographic, we can turn 2D and we've gone to photographic, we can turn 2D to 3D. So we can tilt in that perspective, and we can start to pick it up as a 3D environment. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, there we go. And then from GIS, we can begin to map information into the GIS and build a system or an information model. So next slide, please. So what we do when we build information in is we can save bits of empiric data. So we can model the project through there, and we can pull that BIM engineering model through, and we can overlay the actual build structures we're creating. So that's the station we haven't built yet there on the left of the worksite. Next slide, please. And oh, if it's sure, come up, there you go. We can save information. So they're archaeology finds. So when we excavated that station site, we found some social sort of history ephemera from the 1800s. Turns out people in Brisbane back then drank a lot because we found mostly alcohol bottles, but we found some other bits and pieces too. So anyway, so we can save that information into the GIS system. So we're saving information geographically, and to find that information, you go in the web map to the location. Next slide, please. And of course, what we can then do is experiment with pulling information through in more real time. So this is an air quality read. So this is a live feed into the GIS web map. So we begin to pull through into a 3D visualization of the project environment, something like air quality, which we need to monitor things like dust levels while we're going through the process of construction. Next slide, please. Alrighty, then last but by no means least in terms of GIS and systems, we can of course then strip that layer back and go back to the original BIM infrastructure that sits through it and underneath it. So I described the BIM as being sort of a big sort of kinky wobbly kebab skewer that is threaded through a GIS land layer, which we then turn into a 3D environment. Now, we take all of that data and we take all of that and we put it all in a gaming engine. Okay, so we put ours in a gaming engine called Unreal. So next slide, please. And we've turned it into what we call the VIS model or the VIS model. Now, VIS doesn't stand for anything. It just sounds cooler to say VIS. So go on to the next slide, please, George. Now, to demonstrate the VIS model, rather than try and do it and play videos over a PowerPoint slide, I've asked the guys to put us back to screen view. So if we could just go back to screen view, not really any benefit in seeing the slides. Oh, sorry, not screen view, camera view. Do apologize. So if we can see, if everyone can see me with the TV, but perfect, there you go. All right, thank you very much. And I'm just going to introduce Dan, who's going to just step in shot here and give you a wave. That's Dan, okay? Now, Dan's here because Dan knows how to fly the model, because we fly the model using an Xbox controller, and I'm absolutely hopeless at Xbox. So Dan's going to hopefully see that, and hopefully what you can see on your screens now is the live model. Dan, can you just take us down to Wollongabba? Actually, sorry, can you just turn Cross River Rail off? So Dan's just going to turn a few bits and pieces off. So Dan just turned the station off, we turned the project off, and that's the current day landscape as it looked about a year ago. Turn Cross River Rail back on. And then he turned the Cross River Rail back on, and you'll see that a station, I'm just going to point here, you'll see that a station appeared just here. Then fly down and put us on the boots on the ground there, and you can see the alignment running through into the city and the Albert Street beyond. Just get boots on the ground down there, Dan. Let's go for a little wander. And what we've indicated here is, or we'll put on next, first of all, is the station to stadium connection. So this is basically a full VR experience for the entire length of our project alignment, or as I like to call it sometimes, the world's worst version of Fortnite. So you can run around 17 kilometres of station and railway infrastructure that doesn't exist yet, that won't be open to passengers until 2025. And we can begin to get a feel for what we may or may not build. You just want to put phase one dev on. So Dan can add layers. So what he's just put on there is what we call the station to stadium connection, which we desperately want to build, but we haven't built yet. So this will be a big, long walkway from our train station right over the top of Main Street. So currently, to get from this location to the Gabba Stadium, you've got a cross-traffic upgrade. We're going to build a bridge above grade, and we're going to give the Gabba a facelift because she needs a bit of a just up, the old girl. Otherwise, we'll stop getting test cricket and we'll all be very sad. So basically, we'll get the Gabba a bit of a facelift. Now, if Dan goes back up in the air, we can see that that's all good and well, but we've left an awful lot of developable land behind. So Dan can just put on some future development, and this is where it helps our urban planners and the precinct planners, and we can play around with and indicate what might yet get built at Wollongabba on the land space. Including even, does it go future options down? Including even something really ambitious. Now, we just lazily indicated in order of about $1 billion worth of inner city precinct development that's going to take at least 10 to 15 years to realise in full. So we have to be very careful with public expectation here, but nonetheless, it's pretty cool to be able to start to pre-plan and think ahead. Just take that off for us, Dan. Maybe just go back, get your development off, and just fly everyone to Albert Street. So we're picking up the alignment. We're heading under Kangaroo Point Cliffs, over the Brisbane River, under Botanic Gardens. We're picking up the alignment of Albert Street, which is a main thoroughfare straight through the middle of the Brisbane CBD. And we're arriving at the entrance to the third of the underground stations in the alignment, which is Albert Street. And again, we can see that there's going to be a significant developable land lot in the city centre, and we can see our main station to the right. Now, this has all got the BIM model sat lurking beneath all of this visualization. So Dan, do you want to go into the station? Which means, of course, we can do what we really use the model for most often, which is to contemplate the station environments. So we can think about sight lines, escalator paths, elevator positions, deep stations. We've got to get under a river here in Brisbane. So the engineers assure me it's a good idea to build the stations quite far down in the ground. Otherwise, you're going to get soggy. So there's a big mezzanine level in our stations, which Dan will just give you a quick look-see at. There you go. All right. So there's huge, big mezzanine level, 290 meters long as a station. You want to get all the way down to a platform, Dan? Dan gets there pretty quick. And there you go. So we're down at Albert Street. We're down at level 31 meters down in the ground, and we're contemplating a station platform that will be constructed by 24 and open to the public by 25. And we can have conversations about sight lines. Dan's going to hopefully not get lost in this station that doesn't exist yet and see if he can find the northern entrance, because this station's got two separate entrances. And he's going to pop back out on Albert Street in the middle of the city, but he's going to be significantly closer to Queen Street Mall, which is a major shopping street through the middle of Brisbane for those of you who aren't local. Okay, so then head along there, and then we'll just quickly do a party piece. So we'll blast over Queen Street Mall, we'll go past City Hall, give a wave to the Lord Mayor, and we're arriving at the Roma Street Station location. Now, Dan, just go back to present day. So just stay there, and do your thing where we just drop down. So this is what we've just knocked down. This is called the Transit Centre. This is Brisbane's least loved and most ugly building. So we're rock stars in this town, having just knocked this bad boy down, because everybody hates it. And it actually really sort of is having a negative impact on this end of the CBD. So we got rid of that. Now, it's taken a year to demolish, but we can do it in one click of a button. Don't know what the engineers are on about. Okay, and you can see it's a bit like the Wollongabba site. You get a station, but what you get left behind is significant developable land lots. So Dan's going to pull out a little bit further. And he's going to, again, use the tool to forward think some possible precinct outcomes. So we put phase day one. Now that tower there, Griffith University are talking to us about that tower. They're talking about making that Brisbane's first vertical campus, 50 floors of university all stacked on top of each other, real sort of space saver. Put the rest of it on that. There you go. There's another sort of 5 to 10 years worth of commercial and residential development added on. Now, the party piece for this particular station location is there is a plan to build a thing here called Brisbane Live, an 18,000 seat entertainment centre. Just pop that on down. Slap bang in the middle of the city. Sort of think sort of Staples in New York or similar. Our entertainment centre in Brisbane is at a place called Boondall. It's about 15 k's out of town, and everybody hates it with a passion. So when you tell people that you're knocking down the transit centre, they sort of give you a hug, and you tell them that you might also knock down Boondall and build an 18,000 seat entertainment centre in the middle of Brisbane. They carry you shoulder high through the streets. All right, and then one last thing, Dan, in you go very quickly. If you can get in quickly, just mindful of time. Obviously, we can model other built environments than just our stations. So we're not building Brisbane Live, but we're in charge of planning it until someone else takes over the building of it, possibly may yet be the deliverers of it. So it's upon us to understand what it's going to look like. All righty. If we can go back to the slideshow, please. I'll just quickly round out with a few other observations and I'll come back into the center screen. Thank you very much. All right. Can you just go on to the next slide, please, George? Okay, so 3D. Everything that you just flew through, you can do with a VR headset on. Here at our experience center, where I'm talking from, you can wear a VR headset, you can take yourself on a walking tour. But the video clip on the right of your screens there is our mixed reality theater. That is a room where we reproject the model out through a 5-way projector system, filling a 270-degree field of vision, which allows groups of people to fly through and navigate the model and talk about what they're seeing as a group. So it's a true mixed reality experience. Been an absolute game changer for our engineers and our designers. And it gives us all sorts of capability to talk to accessibility groups, emergency services and people about what it's going to be like to be in the built environment that hasn't yet been constructed. Next slide, please. And then this is a bit of a party piece. Not only can we go from current day, 2020, 2019, as well as when we started demolishing this then, to 2025, which will happen in the clip. Just that's a recreation of what Dan did for us just right there. Is it a separate slide now, this one, I think? No, it's still the same slide. But we've worked with a guy called Brett Levy, who has a product called Virtual Songlines. He's modeled Brisbane as it was in 1819. And his most detailed 3D modeled areas are true to our station locations, which means that we can basically travel back in time to 1819 and understand exactly what each of our stations look like pre-colonial settlement. Okay, which is just an incredibly powerful tool when it comes to contemplating public art or what are we going to do within these station environments that is going to honor the cultural heritage of these stations. And it also is a kick-ass thing to do with school kids. There's lots of teachers who are a big fan of this capability. Next slide, please, George. Okay, and then let's get from beyond 4 and 5D to 6D and 7D, okay? Obviously, every day we build a bit more of the project, the model and the project get closer to being a matching digital twin of each other, okay? Now, we'll talk about digital twins in a second, but what that means on a day-to-day basis is the QR, the rail operator here in Queensland, will be able to train drivers on how to drive through this piece of infrastructure before this piece of infrastructure exists, and they'll be able to train drivers on how the new signalling system works. You'll be able to use this model live and ongoing for maintenance of the infrastructure. You'll be able to pull digital readings and put them into digital meters that you can view in the VR environment without even having to go down into the tunnel, all of that sort of thing. Next slide, please. And then, obviously, as you saw on the model that we flew through, our project happens to go slap bang through the middle of Brisbane, which means that if there's ever going to be a virtual Brisbane, I reckon we've pretty much created the core and the base of it. Next slide, please. And that's it from me. So thank you very much. I'm conscious I've probably chewed up time. I think there's about 5 minutes of my slot left, and I've no idea who I'm handing over to next, but I hope that's been informative. If anybody ever has any questions, please reach out to us. If you're within a coulee of Brisbane and can travel here, let us know and come down to the Experience Centre, and we'll happily walk you through some of this stuff in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Russell. I love that. The description of it as being the world's worst version of Fortnite, but I actually personally found that super, super interesting. I do think though, Russell, you need to have a chat with Dan, because when he was going through that model, he kept jumping the ticketing budget barriers, and I don't think he paid for a ticket. And I'm concerned about what he gets up to in his spare time.